Good afternoon, everyone. This is Naz Ahmed. I'm Attorney General Josh Stein's press secretary, and we are here today with several attorneys general to make a major announcement on opioid litigation. I will hand it over to Attorney General Stein, who will then introduce the next speaker and so on and so forth. If you have questions after the attorneys general conclude their remarks, please feel free to click the raise hand button on Zoom and we will call on you. Attorney General Stein, over to you.
Thank you, Naz. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this long-awaited announcement. I'm North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. These negotiations have been arduous, and we've all been anxiously awaiting this day. But before we get into the details of the agreements, I want to take a moment to focus on the reason we're all here. It's for people like Drew Gintis, a young man from Cary who suffered a high school wrestling injury, Caleb Shelton from Greensboro, a star baseball pitcher who had a number of sports surgeries, Michael Ragone from Charlotte, who experienced another sports injury, Katie Thomas of Efland, who had back surgery when she was 13. Each of these individuals was prescribed opioids to which they became addicted, and tragically, they all overdosed and died. Their stories are sadly all too common. In recent years, more than 16,000 North Carolinians have died of an opioid overdose. We mourn their deaths and feel compassion for their families, for the heartache that never goes away. Today's announcement is also in honor of people like Ashley from Wilson, who became addicted after she was prescribed opioids for a cheerleading injury in high school. Her life spiraled and fell apart until she found hope in recovery. Now she's involved in a recovery community. She's a mom and is teaching art to kids. The promise of today's announcement is that we will see more Ashleys and fewer Drews, Calebs, Michaels, and Katies. The $26 billion agreement will bring desperately needed resources home to each of our states, an estimated $750 million here in North Carolina, to help people struggling with opioid use disorder find hope, freedom from addiction, and happiness. North Carolina has signed on to this deal, and thanks to a strong partnership with our cities and counties, local governments are already jumping on board. I look forward to working with county and city leaders across the state to ensure that North Carolina brings home the maximum amount of funds possible. We cannot delay. Too many people's lives depend on it. The money is, of course, a big part of this announcement, but we are also fundamentally changing this industry. The distributors will fund an independent clearinghouse to identify red flags so they can take action when there's a pill mill or when a community is drowning in prescription opioids. The distributors must prohibit the shipping of suspicious orders, report them to regulators, and terminate offending pharmacies, all subject to the review of an independent monitor. In addition, Johnson & Johnson will get out of the opioid business altogether and will not fund any organization that promotes opioids. These sweeping and groundbreaking changes in the way that drug distributors and manufacturers do business will ensure something like this never happens again. As everyone on this call knows, achieving today's settlement was immensely challenging, with more than 3,000 state and local government plaintiffs and multiple defendants. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of my colleagues here today, as well as those who couldn't join us. The resolution represents the definition of a bipartisan team effort, and I am immensely proud of the work we have done together. Finally, I want to call out my first assistant and general counsel, Swain Wood, who has done tremendous work on days, nights, and weekends over many, many months on behalf of the people not only of North Carolina, but of the entire United States. Swain, I sincerely thank you, as well as the other staff in my office and offices of Attorney General across the country, all of whom define what it means to be a public servant. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery, whose steady and thoughtful leadership was instrumental to our success. Herbert.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and this is a good day. In Tennessee, in Nashville, we woke up this morning to front page news not the kind of news that we want. The Tennessean, major newspaper in Nashville, reported on the front page that 2020 was the deadliest year on record for opioid overdoses in Tennessee. About 3,000 people died, mostly involving fentanyl or similar synthetic opioids. But this was a 44% increase, according to the CDC. Deaths spiked nationwide, but increased in Tennessee more than 43 other states. So the urgency of this problem continues. It's just relentless. And today is a good day with that backdrop of that kind of news. With these agreements on the table, we're ready to move forward. And it's taken a good bit of time to get there. I'm like General Stein. I want to emphasize to everyone that there's several points on how we work together. First, all states and territories have the problem. They have a crisis, and every state has worked hard on this issue. I don't know of a state that has not worked hard. These particular states that are on this call and some additional ones who weren't able to be on the call, work together, and we're both red states and blue states. We get along well, we communicate well, we solve problems, and this is not unusual in the AG community. Day in and day out, we do this. I particularly would like to thank 3 states that were not on the call. California, Florida, and Texas were very instrumental in reaching this agreement, and appreciate their efforts. And as General Stein said, our staff has just done spectacular work. And I wish I had time to list all the attorneys that we have, but virtually we've got 15 or 20 attorneys that have been involved in these investigations for over 4 years. And it's taken us a long time to get here. But we're here, we have the agreements on the table to consider. We want other states and subdivisions to sign on. So we're not quite to the finish line yet, but we're getting there. We're making real progress. And at this point, I want to close and pass the baton to the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and my friend Josh Shapiro.
Well, General Slattery, thank you so much. I'm Attorney General Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. I really want to thank you and General Stein for your steady leadership throughout this process. Us Yankees talk pretty fast and furious, and I think having you and General Stein slow things down and smooth things out at times was incredibly helpful. It has been a privilege to work with both of you, with the leaders who are represented here today, who you'll hear from, and really from all of our colleagues across the country. It's also been a privilege to represent the families and friends and those suffering the disease of addiction here in Pennsylvania and across the country. I just want you all to know that my heart goes out to you. I've sat in the living rooms of families here in Pennsylvania, on the bleachers at high school stadiums, and walked the blocks of the streets of Philadelphia and elsewhere that have just been wrecked by this public health and public safety crisis. And I want you all to know that we collectively took on some of the most powerful companies in the world to fight for you. And today, as you heard outlined by General Stein, we're able to deliver something for you. I also want to just say a word to my team. David Wade, my senior advisor, who I asked to lead this effort for us nearly 4 years ago, working by my side late at night, early in the morning, weekends. He was a big part of getting this done. And together with Jim Donahue, a national expert and an invaluable leader amongst the AG offices in the country, their guidance and insight proved to be crucial to getting this done. And so I just want to thank David and Jim. Here in Pennsylvania, we lost 5,172 brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, moms and dads last year to the opioid crisis. Just to put that into some practical terms, that is 14 people every single day who have succumbed to this crisis. And this was a person-made crisis. These deaths did not have to happen. This epidemic was caused by an army, really manufactured by an army of pharmaceutical executives and drug distributors who decided that they wanted to pursue their bottom lines over the health and safety and well-being of the people of my state. And look, no amount of money, no amount of sanctions will be able to ever right those wrongs that they did. But here's the thing, this settlement that my colleagues and I are outlining today puts in place controls that will go a long way to making sure this never happens again. And the resources that we're able to bring back to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to other states in our nation, will help expand life-saving treatment options for all in rural communities, suburban communities, and urban communities alike. We expect broad bipartisan support for this agreement from AGs all across this country. Look, let's be real about something. As a group, we don't always agree. That is certainly not breaking news. But I do believe that all of the attorneys general understand two things very clearly. One, the true cost of this epidemic is immense, far greater than this deal. And two, this is the best way we can deliver the most help to communities in need right now. That's what this agreement is all about. Today's action sends a message to drug distributors and pharmaceutical companies that we simply will not accept this type of behavior, and that we are all always here collectively to fight like hell for the people that we serve. This is just one piece of our response in Pennsylvania to this epidemic. My office will continue to fight this crisis on every front, from the street corners to the pharmacy counters to the boardrooms of powerful companies across the globe. And with that, again, want to thank my colleagues and recognize one of the great leaders of our efforts, the Attorney General of the state of New York, Tish James. Tish.
Thank you, AG Shapiro. I too want to join and thank AG Stein and AG Slattery for their Southern hospitality, for their Southern charm, obviously for corralling a bunch of attorney generals who obviously wanted to get to the finish line. And so I want to thank all of my colleagues who are on this Zoom call this afternoon, but I also want to thank all of the numerous other attorney generals from around the nation for their work on this global settlement. And as a former staff member, I want to thank all of the staff members, and I particularly want to thank my leader, Jennifer Levy, for all of the work that she has done, for working tirelessly on this matter. I've held countless number of mothers and fathers, and brothers and sisters and grandmothers and grandparents in my arms before open caskets. I made a commitment to them when I ran in as the Attorney General that I would do all that in my power to provide some solace to them. And again, no amount of money will provide any solace to these families. But we all know that for more than 2 decades, the opioid epidemic has wreaked havoc on New Yorkers and Americans across this nation. And hundreds of thousands have died. And during these last 16 months, during the COVID pandemic, so many more have died as a result of drug overdoses. And we see the destruction. I know I see it on the streets of New York City and all across this state, individuals who have given up hope, given up, individuals who have been left behind, who are disconnected from their families, who are struggling each and every day. The trail of destruction and tragedy has basically ravaged every corner of New York and just about every region of this nation. And to be clear, the numerous companies that manufactured and distributed this poison did so without any regard for human life and for the national crisis that they caused. And so this is a bittersweet moment for me and for all of us. Yes, we've reached a settlement after many months and years of negotiation, but it will not bring back the loss of life. But what it will do is prevent this tragedy from happening again. What it will do is provide prevention and education and abatement and beds to those organizations and hospitals who need it now more than ever. This agreement will deliver more than $1 billion from the three distributors and up to additional 230 from J&J into New York's communities ravaged by opioids. And I want to thank the state legislature of New York for, again, adopting, and the governor for signing into law a measure that would place these funds into a locked box in New York, and not into the general fund, but for the purposes of prevention. And it was an effort that we led here in New York. And so, again, it'll be more money for education and prevention and recovery programs and treatment options, and funds for our first responders so that they can respond to individuals who unfortunately are struggling under the throes of addiction. And then, of course, we all know that we announced a share of potential resolution with Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. And although it's not enough, and although it's not a perfect settlement, we know that it will go a long way to address this epidemic as well. And so, New York, this brings this statewide total. Our office has negotiated in this last month to fight the opioid epidemic to approximately $1.5 billion. And I want to thank all of my colleagues who are here today. And as I have said before, when it comes to opioid negotiations, there is no perfect solution. And oftentimes we have to make concessions. But as we have dealt with delay after delay from the different manufacturers and distributors, we have sued more and more, and Americans have become addicted. As more and more Americans have become addicted to opioids, these companies continue to profit off the misery, the death, and destruction nationwide. And today we put an end to it. So let me end by saying, I think we all recognize, again, that no amount of money will ever compensate for the pain and destruction and provide any relief to all of the families that I've met in my travels along throughout New York State, and all of those who I've met at funerals and memorials. So again, my thoughts and my prayers go out to all of those families, both here in New York and across our nation. And I hope that this provides you with some measure of relief. And now I turn it over to my good friend from the great state of Louisiana, Attorney General Landry.
Thank you. Thank you, Tish. And I too want to first thank my colleagues. Individually, we may have our differences sometimes. Collectively, this is an opportunity of which we rose up and recognized that we had an opportunity and an obligation to the American people and to the citizens of our states. Each and every one of these AGs and their staffs worked tirelessly in order to get to where we are today. I also want to personally thank my Chief Deputy Bill Stiles and our Consumer Protection Division for, again, working alongside these great attorney generals and their staffs. This is a great settlement that gives us an opportunity to directly help the people who have been affected by this horrible epidemic. This is an opportunity for money to go directly to addicts. It's something that should have been done when this epidemic first was brought forth to political leaders. And for some reason, we failed to address the actual addicts. And whether it was from the corporate boardrooms or to the capitals, there was a failure to address addicts. And so what we see today is the labor of these attorney generals in holding some of those accountable for this epidemic and saying, we need an opportunity to address addiction. Louisiana, unfortunately, has been in one of the top 10 states that has been tragically affected. I know personally friends that I have lost and buried and relatives due to this horrific addiction. And so, again, I think that I'm proud to stand here with these friends of mine in fashioning this settlement and finally being able to bring some relief to those that are impacted by this addiction. I also want to ensure that the money goes, again, directly to those that are addicted. When I first came into office, we stood firm in saying that we were going to look for solutions in order to end this epidemic that was plaguing Louisiana. We believed it was a multi-dimensional approach. And so this is one of the dimensions in ensuring that hopefully in the near future, there is a happy ending and that we can get through this epidemic and put it behind us. So again, I want to thank my colleagues and our staff that has worked tirelessly to help us fashion this. And now I'll turn it over to General Jennings from the state of Delaware.
Kathy, I can't hear you. Can y'all hear Kathy? Kathy, why don't we go to William and then we'll come back to you and give you a chance to figure that out. William Tong from Connecticut and instrumental Attorney General in this entire process. William?
Thank you, General Stein and General Slattery. As one of the fast-talking Yankees here, let me also add my thanks to all of my colleagues across the country from states big and small, coast to coast, Democrat, Republican, attorneys general coming together to produce this important result. And I echo what General James said. This is a bittersweet moment for all of us, because as you've heard from all of my colleagues, and what really strikes all of us every single day is the size and the scale of this crisis. It's a crisis that, apart from the COVID pandemic, I think we can all recognize as the worst public health crisis in America, one that claims close to 100,000 people across the country per year. In Connecticut, it claims more than 1,000 lives every year. As General Shapiro said, that's 1,000 families in Connecticut wrecked by this crisis. And that number keeps going up. And it causes $10 billion in damage every year to our state. And that's why this $26 billion agreement, which represents the second largest cash settlement in American history, we believe, exceeded only by the tobacco settlement more than 20 years ago, that this is an important step forward to confronting the scourge of addiction across Connecticut and across the country, and to funding needed treatment and prevention and addiction science programs across our states. Let me also acknowledge, as General James did, that there's not enough money in the world, frankly, to address the pain and the suffering and the tragedy of the families that all of us know in our states. And there isn't enough justice that we can deliver to those families and those communities. But this is a good amount of money. It is a strong amount of money to try to help where help is so much needed. And it does provide some justice to families across Connecticut, across the country that have lost so much. Let me just say, all of us have mentioned families in our states. I'm mindful of a couple of people. Mike Taylor was a young man. He was a tennis player. He went to Villanova. He was from Darien, Connecticut. He actually worked on my very first campaign for elective office. Mike was prescribed opioids for a tennis injury and fell into addiction, and we lost him. And we honor his life every year through a cardboard boat race in Long Island Sound, which is a fun event to celebrate his life, but a sobering reminder every year of the tremendous toll that this crisis has taken on him and his community in our state. Shortly, I'll be joined by Paige Niver, who will join me again to talk about the experience of her daughter, who was prescribed opioids after a bike accident at 14 years old. And she also fell into addiction, went to hell and back, and is now sober, is back on her feet and fights every single day. And so the final thing I'll say is that while this is a huge settlement, the second largest in history, it will provide the resources that many cities and towns and families need. This in many ways is just a start. It's just a start for us in our states, but it's just a start for these families, because Paige Niver's daughter, their family, they're in this for life. And this is part of our commitment to them, to stand with them on their road to recovery for the rest of their lives and the many other families that will need us for years to come. This is a long-term commitment, and I'm grateful for the work of my colleagues in making this happen. Thank you, General Stein. General Jennings, if you're ready now, I'll turn it back to you.
Hopefully you can all hear me now. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. Let me begin by saying the obvious, which is this is a big deal for Delaware. And it is a big deal across our country in each and every state in our country. Delaware has the second worst fatal overdose rate in the entire country per capita. The number of prescription pills that flooded into our state was orders of magnitude beyond any legitimate medical need. One rural community of 2,000 people received more than 2 million pills from 2006 to 2012. All the money in the world, as others have said, cannot make whole the families who have paid the true costs of the opioid epidemic. But we can, going forward, save lives. And that is why we have reached this resolution with the companies today. People across this nation have suffered enormously as a result of others' desire for profit. Delaware families have paid the ultimate price for others to profit. This settlement is for Delaware's families and for each and every family who has suffered a loss in our great country. We did this for them. We fought long and hard for a settlement that helps them on the path to recovery, that helps them find treatment, and that helps us abate this crisis in our states. We now have that deal, and I am so grateful to all of my colleagues today and on this call and throughout our country, including those who could not make it today. I am especially grateful for the people who work for our attorneys general, because we worked long and hard. We traveled all over the country to make this deal happen, and that was years of work. But they work the hardest, and it is their tremendous talent that I want to recognize today. And so I want to give a big shout out to Owen Lefcon, who is the head of our fraud division. He was there by my side each and every step. Marion Quirk, a bankruptcy expert. And while she wasn't needed in this part, she was definitely vital in other parts of the opioid epidemic solution. Chief Deputy Attorney General Alex Mackler, always behind the scenes with his genius and hard work, working with all of your chief deputies as well, and Christian Wright. I most especially want to thank former Attorney General of Delaware, Matt Dent, because he started the opioid lawsuits in Delaware before I walked into office. And he has been a crusader for the day that we are seeing come to fruition now. So with this settlement in hand, we now look forward to embarking on the next phase, which is to secure the agreement of all of our subdivisions that they will sign, and that we can bring to Delaware the maximum amount of money that we can. And that's never going to be enough. Other people have said it. It is never going to be enough. I am grateful to our General Assembly for passing a law that created an opioid fund commission. Every dollar that we recover in Delaware will go to abatement. And for that, we are tremendously grateful that the General Assembly in their wisdom did that, and that everyone who should have a say in how that money gets spent will have a say. And I'm going to leave you with this. As others have said, these are stories of human lives and human loss. All of us have friends and relatives who have suffered greatly. There's one lady I have come to know. She lives in downstate Delaware, and she would not want me to use her name, I think. But she has a son who for years and years suffered from substance use disorder. She told me that she would drive him to the only detox and treatment center in the state of Delaware. This was years ago. And that he almost died in the car on more than one occasion. She suffered so greatly herself in trying to get him help over and over and over again for many, many years. I am happy to say that he's now working alongside her at the job that she has had for many years. And I've gotten an opportunity to get to know him. I have tremendous optimism for the future, most especially because we now have something solid to bring into our communities to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll open it up for questions from reporters now. Please raise your hand on the little Zoom button and I will call on you. And when we do call on you, please direct your question to an attorney general. Thank you.
Naz, may I add one short statement? I wanted to thank the team in Connecticut. Peggy Chappell is the Deputy Attorney General of Connecticut and Special Counsel for Opioids, Kim Massicott, who's now a judge, and Matt Fitzsimmons have led our team along with Jeremy Perlman, Sarah Nadeem, and many, many others. So thank you to our team here in Connecticut.
Can I also add former Assistant Attorney General David Nachman and current Attorney General Umair Khan for all of their work as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll start with Nate Raymond.
Yeah, hi. This is for, I'm guessing Mr. Stein, but could you give a sense of how many states you're expecting to support this settlement? We've heard from some like Washington and West Virginia that they're planning to probably reject it. So I'm curious what the sign-on rate is, and likewise, if you have a sense of to what extent local governments are going to participate in this.
Yeah, we can't give a definitive answer right now. There are 30 days during when the states can sign on. Our expectation is that north of 40 and likely well north of 40 will sign on, but I can't speak for the other states at this point. I can let you know that all of the states on the executive committee absolutely endorse this as the best way to get meaningful resources into our communities and save lives. In terms of the local governments, each state is a little bit different in that regard. I'm very optimistic that we'll have universal support of local governments here in North Carolina, but why don't I see if any other attorney general would like to address that topic?
Josh, one thing to point out is that there is an MDL that's up in Cleveland, a multi-district litigation that includes about 3,000 to 4,000 cases, and the attorneys that represent those local subdivisions have been involved in the negotiations and are on board with this proposal. So we think a significant piece for the local subdivisions will be in place during the 120-day period. We hope to get much more, even than there's some litigating and non-litigating subdivisions, and we hope to get a good portion of them. But we'll start out pretty strong, I think.
And can I answer the question that's in the chat with respect to New York? This agreement will deliver more than $1 billion from the three distributors, up to $230 million from J&J. That's more than $1.25 billion that will specifically help us invest in prevention, education, and recovery in programs across New York, including obviously beds and treatment options. And then lastly, the $200 million from the Sackler-Purdue resolution as well.
Next, we'll go to, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to the dollar figures nationally, the 4 defendants in this case are at $26 billion, but they're not the first cases that we've advanced. General James mentioned the Purdue Pharma matter, which is in bankruptcy, but there's been a plan that is being considered there. There's also Insys Therapeutics in bankruptcy. There is McKinsey Consulting, which had advised Purdue Pharma. And when you put all of the settlements to date, it's approximately $32.7 billion collectively. And there are other companies out there that we are investigating and litigating against. So we don't think we're done even today.
Next up is Sarah Randazzo.
Hi, this question is for Attorney General Landry. You mentioned that the money from this would go directly to addicts, but I'm curious what you mean by that, if Louisiana actually plans to distribute money directly to families, or if you more just mean that by using it for services that help addicts, that's getting directly to addicts.
Well, it's a great question. I was very proud to hear that some of my colleagues have been able to get their legislature and their governor on board with securing a fund and a lockbox so that the money isn't just spent inside of a general fund. Unfortunately, in Louisiana, we just had a bill vetoed by our governor, a bill that was passed in a bipartisan manner. In fact, we didn't lose a vote in the House that would have sent the money into our drug courts in an effort to help those that were addicted, to do 2 things: to one, address addiction and crime at the same time. Unfortunately, the bill was vetoed, and so we're kind of back to the drawing board. But one of the principles that I've always held is that this money must go down and address addiction. Again, we're here because of addiction. We've lost loved ones because of addiction. And the sooner we address the addiction portion, the sooner we'll be out of the epidemic.
Next up is Jamie Satterfield.
Mute myself. Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes. We can, please go ahead.
Okay. My question is for General Slattery. Do you know yet a figure for Tennessee on what you expect we will get?
Well, there are a number of qualifications and benchmarks that we have to hit, but as many states have already indicated, Tennessee passed legislation that's going to really help us. So I thank the General Assembly and Governor Lee for putting that in place, and it's going to be directed to abatement in large part, and get to the local folks who really, where the need really is. And I'm thinking, Jamie, it's probably around $600 million if we hit all the benchmarks.
And do you have some sort of committee that will make decisions, General, about the money? Is that a little too soon?
No, it isn't. The legislation that we passed establishes an opioid abatement council. Okay. Team members that need to be appointed, but they will be in place by the time that we get these funds, which, by the way, the funds are paid out over a period of time. But that abatement council will have the authority to direct the funds. The membership of the council is pretty strict. They need to be well-versed and have extensive experience in fields that relate to the opioid epidemic. So our structure is in place, which we're very thankful for. But once we get the funds, we'll give it to the council there, and it's earmarked for abatement.
Thank you.
All right, and next up, and please identify the media outlet you're speaking for. Geoff Mulvihill.
Hello, this is Geoff Mulvihill from the Associated Press. Thank you so much for having this call and taking my question. This is a question, I guess, for AG Stein. There have been mentions of the tobacco settlement of 20-some years ago. We all know that a lot of that money didn't go directly to public health or tobacco mitigation. I'm wondering what measures are in place as part of this settlement that would make sure the money goes to the intended cause. Thank you.
The vast majority of the resources from this secured from these settlements must go to abatement. It's a provision in the agreements that we have with the defendants. They will be subject to court order, and the appropriating entities, whether it's the North Carolina General Assembly or county commissions, whoever get those funds, get them subject to the court order. And there's been widespread agreement. The legislature has embraced this concept. The county commissions have embraced this concept. We all are experiencing the consequences in communities across North Carolina, across the country, of this epidemic, and everyone is unanimous that the funds must go to address it so we can improve people's lives.
Thank you.
Next up is Sarah Wade.
Hi, this is a question for Attorney General Slattery. And yes, I'm with the Bristol Herald Courier. I'm wondering, General Slattery, just based on the size and scope of this lawsuit, what can people expect in terms of how long it'll take this money to come through and really start reaching local communities?
Well, Sarah, the funds, if we can hit the benchmarks and get the threshold number of states and subdivisions on board in the period of time that we discussed, these 30 and 120-day periods, we could have first payments by the end of the year. I think would be the earliest. Just a guess, to be honest. There's some in Tennessee, and General Stein mentioned this. There's already been a settlement with McKinsey, so there's some funds that are already available. But we need to set up that particular council that we mentioned and get them operating so that they can designate and evaluate the particular programs and destinations for the funds.
Next up is M. Dwyer.
Hello, this is Matt Dwyer from Connecticut Public Radio. I guess my question is for Attorney General Tong. Several of the Attorney Generals mentioned that you'll work to maximize the money your states obtain. Are there certain steps that the states would have to take to increase their share of the settlement?
Tish, do you want to take that? I think General Tong had to leave.
So there is a requirement that municipalities and counties have to sign on to this settlement. And so at this point in time, we are anticipating that the vast majority of our counties and our municipalities will sign on to maximize the amount of the recovery, the amount of funds that the state will receive. And so those discussions are going on as we speak. But we are confident that all of the states represented here today, as well as most of the states who have signed on, will be able to secure the vast majority of their counties and municipalities, including tribes as well.
And Matt, this is Kathy Jennings. I would like to add, I mean, in Delaware, it's perhaps less difficult to achieve that kind of piece because we are so small. But what we heard from subdivisions, from towns, from counties up and down Delaware is they want to be heard in how the settlement gets used. And so it's really important that they have a seat at the table, which is why when the legislature passed the Opioid Fund Commission, they gave subdivisions a seat, more than one seat, seats at the table to be able to say where that money should go so that they're not left without recourse.
So does this mean that town councils or mayors or town officials will actually have to decide whether or not they want to actually sign some sort of paperwork or sign on to this?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
They have to.
Yes. But it's also important to note that a lot of the attorneys that represent a number of these municipality subdivisions are also a number of the same attorneys that have signed on to the settlement for other clients. So we believe that at the end of the day, the vast majority of municipalities and towns and subdivisions will be of one accord.
And for Attorney General James, will all of the towns and cities and counties have to sign on, or just ones that had filed lawsuits or ones that were part of a lawsuit?
It's most of the ones who have filed lawsuits.
Okay, thank you very much.
In New York, it's of the 52 counties, 50 of our counties are in the midst of signing on.
And to your point, Matt, that it's both those local jurisdictions that have litigated and those local jurisdictions of size that have not yet litigated. That the defendants, appropriately so, given the size of the dollars they're committing, want to try to achieve as much peace as absolutely possible. And so it will also apply to non-litigating subdivisions, those who have not yet filed.
And obviously the subdivisions would have to sign on to get any funds. And as importantly, their state has to sign on in order to get funds too.
Yeah, that's one more question. Is there a deadline for them to sign on?
It's 30 days for states, and then it'll be 120 more days for local jurisdictions. But there's really not an end to the clock on local jurisdictions. If there's one local jurisdiction, 7 months from now that hadn't signed on joins, they can do that, and then they will be open to receive their share of the funds. But our hope is that we can achieve as close to universal peace over the next 4 or 5 months.
Thank you.
Next up is Jan Hoffman.
Hi, Attorneys General. Thank you for sharing this information with us. I have, if possible, 2 questions. One is, at first blush, it appears that the companies that you are agreeing with still hold a great number of cards. Can you be more specific about the threshold number of states they want to see sign on before they start payments?
The agreement does not specify a certain number of states nor cities and towns. It really requires a critical mass. I think we are going to easily achieve those numbers, but they're as yet undetermined.
Okay, and my second question
Jan, can I also just say, you indicated that they hold most of the cards. I would disagree with you. I think we hold the cards. The reality is that they want global peace, and there is obviously an incentive for more municipalities to sign on to this settlement. And so I think we are in the upper seat, if you will.
But the burden essentially is on the states to sell the deal, not the companies, correct?
The companies want to have this put behind them as much or more than we do. We want to get these monies in our communities as quickly as possible and to the maximum amount possible, because people are dying, and we want to save lives. We want to help people escape the prison of addiction so that they can be free and make choices about what they do every day, just like all of us do, without having to be concerned about trying to find that morphine molecule to inject in their body. So that's what we want. The companies similarly want this behind them. And if a lot of states don't join, or a lot of local jurisdictions don't join, they're going to be litigating this for years. And they don't want that. And that's why they've put up $26 billion, is because they want to induce local jurisdictions and other states to join as well.
And they don't want the negative publicity. They don't want the stories of all of those who are struggling from addiction. More than anything else, they want to save their brand.
Okay, and to be clear, this is, I'm sorry.
I'll just add, it's one of the things that I'm proudest about of this executive committee, Tish and Josh and Herb, and General Tong and Jennings. One of the interesting things about this is we recognize that every day we don't have the money to treat addiction, we're burying more and more people. And so we believe that this was the best way to move forward. I think that states that don't sign on are really being irresponsible instead of trying to make the most perfect settlement out there. We don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good, because each and every day that goes by without these dollars is a day that someone is not being treated.
Okay, and just to clarify, these are payments, at least from the distributors, over 18 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and one more follow-up question. Could you please describe how much of the agreement is going to be going towards attorney's fees and costs?
Of the 26 billion, 23.9 billion will be going to abatement. So slightly over 2 billion is both fees and costs. And frankly, we all, even states like mine that did not hire outside counsel, we incurred substantial costs. Getting this data, doing the analysis, hiring experts. I mean, these are all very expensive aspects of litigation, and we incurred those costs because it was a just case to bring. It was the right thing to do. And so there are, I think, slightly over 2 billion in fees and costs, and we're very proud that we'll be delivering nearly $24 billion in abatement.
Thank you very much.
Next is the Chronicle.
Yes, my name is Anthony Leak. I'm with Chronicle Fashion Guide. My question is more to Attorney General Letitia James. As far as New York with the settlement, do you know exactly when you guys are expecting the settlement to actually come in?
So funds from J&J will start flowing into New York within 2 months. And so we anticipate that we will be getting resources. And again, the legislation that was passed by the state, the Assembly and the Senate, signed by the governor, creates a committee which will determine where the funds go for the purposes of abatement. So again, in 2 months in the state of New York, funds will start flowing from the settlement.
Okay.
And then lastly, we still have a trial against remaining defendants, Endo, Allergen, and Teva. And that trial continues, but we anticipate that at some point in time, it'll go to mediation. We're hopeful.
All right, my last question is for Attorney General Josh Stein. Do you know when the money will be coming into North Carolina and how it will be distributed?
We expect that the first payments will be made at the beginning of April 2nd of next year. Then subsequent payments will happen on July 1st, including July 1st of next year. The funds will be allocated to counties and the state. Whether it goes to the counties or goes to the state, those entities, the government, the local and state government, will use the funds to address the crisis. And one thing that's excellent in my mind about this agreement is that it gives a menu of appropriate abatement activities, things that we know are evidence-based to save lives, to increase the number of people living in recovery. And those are the purposes for which the monies can be spent, and be spent exclusively.
Next is Harry.
Hi, thanks. Yes, I'm Harry Parker from Politics NY. My question is for Attorney General James. Attorney General, you had mentioned quite a bit about your interactions with the families of the victims, and also mentioned quite a bit of the damage that these companies knowingly inflicted. What do you say to both the families of these victims as well as just the general public about the fact that there are no criminal liabilities for the individuals at the top who knew what they were doing?
What I can say is that this agreement is silent on any criminal prosecution. What I can also say that, again, no amount of money will obviously provide them with any relief, but at the same time, these funds will go towards abatement, education, prevention, and for beds and to hospitals and facilities that desperately need it. And particularly at a time when we are somewhat coming out of COVID-19, that we can address all of those who have been struggling with overdoses, who unfortunately have been socially isolated and who have not been in a position where they were able to get any assistance. And so I am proud of this agreement. and look forward to, again, working to make sure that these resources go to those who are struggling with addiction.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up. Do you plan on bringing charges against, or possibly bringing charges against any executives at any of these major firms moving forward?
No comment at this point in time. I just know that the agreement is silent on that.
And what I think is our last question is Jeffrey Overley.
Hi there, can you hear me?
You can, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I just have a two-part question. First, I was just wondering how we should think about the importance of private counsel for cities and counties to this settlement in light of their substantial attorney fees. And then second, I'm just wondering if there are any admissions of wrongdoing. If so, if you guys could please describe them, and if not, if you could say why not.
New York does not engage in outside counsel.
And I might add as well, Louisiana did not. The outside counsel that we engaged in were paid by the hour. But I will note that based upon the figures that Josh presented, you will see that amount, and that is in total, represents less than 10% of the total amount of the recovered, which is certainly not what we've normally seen in the legal industry. And I think that represents a huge victory for those of us who have tried to keep the legal costs down. So, again, I would say that even those that engage in contingency fee agreements, I think that the total amount that's going to be going to both cost and fees is less than what we've seen in the past.
Tennessee, likewise, has not engaged outside counsel. In fact, we've advised our local subdivisions, especially as we headed toward this settlement, not to hire outside counsel because they would incur additional costs. And as we've discussed before, most of the money is going to be going to local programs in any event. And your last question, as far as whether there's an admission of wrongdoing, there's not an express admission of wrongdoing, but I can think of 26 billion reasons why they thought there was some real wrongdoing and decided to enter into this agreement.
Yeah, I think it's important, again, to reiterate, referring to the last question, this settlement is civil in nature and not criminal.
Great. Well, those are all of our questions for this afternoon. So we will wrap up. A recording of this press call will be available on the North Carolina Attorney General's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/NCAGO. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Proud of all of y'all. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.